I grew up with both my parents really never going to church. I think my mom went to church when she was real little to a Pentecostal, so she had a very different outlook of what church was, and I don't think it was a really good experience. So I grew up believing that you could believe in God, but you didn't have to go to a church building to believe in God. But we never really went. I think I went a couple times just to go with friends when I was younger. Fast forward to meeting Jason. He grew up in the church, but he was no longer with the church when I met him.
For me, getting baptized at a very early age, I think I was about 12 years old. We grew up in a very blue-collar family. We spent a lot of time working to help provide for the family. My mother took us dutifully to church as our family. My father worked a lot, so he was not always around in that sense. And so I found myself working with my hands, working with kind of the sweat of my brow. And my brother did as well, and we liked it because we knew that we were contributing. It also gave us a chance to start earning money. And so, but as a teenager, I found myself both with a little bit of money in my pocket and trying to fit in the right crowd sometimes, and to kind of to be the man. I had affinity for motorcycles and muscle cars, and I saw myself with the people that I was running with kind of leading that pack a little bit, and so drugs became a big thing. I found myself wanting to kind of run the group, and then before long things got kind of out of hand. Found myself in a bit of trouble. Found myself expelled from school, in trouble with the law, really in a dark place. And in order to kind of didn't see any way out. There were several folks that felt like they had turned their back on me. At the same time, I guess I had turned my back on them. And I saw a lot of, it felt like as a young man, a lot of hypocrisy. And I found myself trying to solve my own problems. And I went about a long stretch when I was young of working, getting myself to get back into school, homeschooling myself, working with the police department to try to really making a deal with them in order to try to not have the consequences to be as severe for the things that I had done. It exposed me to really even a deeper, darker world than I had on my own. And so when I came out of that experience pretty bitter and pretty broken and angry a lot, because although things had kind of healed themselves and I found myself back into school and I found myself right with the law and things seemed to be whole again, I had some pretty deep scars as a result of it, some bad memories, a lot of stress and anxiety about it. And at that point, I just threw myself into drinking and smoking and spending money in ways that I shouldn't have spent money. I found myself bankrupt at a young age, and I just was found some relationships that were unhealthy and with companionship, found myself divorced at a young age, and so I just found a bottom there. And when I held on to the fact that, at times it couldn't get any worse, but then it did, owing lots of money, found myself really in a really unhealthy spot. You really began to kind of devalue myself. There were things that I held on to. I pursued my career, my education in spite of all that, during all of that, was able to hold on to that. But I did not think that I was then worthy of being, loved by God. I had done so many things that I knew were disapproved of by Him. I found myself out of the light, and I thought to myself, and not worthy to step back in. And during that time, I just began to kind of wallow in my own self-pity, I guess you would say, of, well, I guess this is where I am. I guess this is the life that I've chosen. And there were moments where it feels good, and then there are moments where it's incredibly sad and dark. There was a time where I woke up one day and I realized that I know what's missing. I looked to Lyjah, and although we had gotten together at a time where I wasn't faithful as a Christian, I said, will you will you go with me down this path to go back to the church and to see what's there for me? Is there something still there for me? And getting back with Madison and Mike and studying with Lyjah, I could feel that hole filling up. I could feel a peace. I could feel a feeling, a sense of being at home. And at that point, I knew I wouldn't leave again. And regardless of the time that I spent away, I knew that that foundation had been set in my heart. My heart was somewhere that was never far from God. So, but I also knew that it was part of a transformation, that it takes work. It's something that I had this thought, but I had to turn it into action. And that involves, getting up and moving and getting involved. And one of the things that Madison was really great about is all those opportunities that are there to do that. And fortunately, through our studies, I think Lyjah came to a decision that was a personal decision, because you can be with someone and share a lot of their thoughts and beliefs, but I never impressed upon her that my decision to turn my back on being away and looking and focusing forward had to be hers.
When he asked me to go back, I was like, Sunday mornings is for grocery shopping. We had 2 small kids at the time, and so we would talk about going, but then we didn't know. At the time, we still lived in Pensacola, Florida, and we didn't know if we should go with his mom's church or try to find one that was bigger that had a youth program that say, well, if we did decide to go every Sunday. So we talked about it, but when we lived there, it was just talk. So when we moved up here, Jason says, I think we need to go. And I said, okay, because I want to give my kids the choice if they want to go to church or not go to church. I never got that choice saying yes or no. I was just told we're not going. So I wanted to make sure our children had that choice. So I said, yes, let's go and see what it's all about. So we went online and we found a church that had one of the better youth programs, and they said, let's go try it out. And we did, and we were there for a little while, and Mike's secretary called me and said, do you want to come for a meeting during Bible class on Sunday? And at first I think we were traveling, so I said no, we'll have to do another time. And then we did meet with him. We ended up meeting with him for over a year, I want to say. It was a long time, but he studied with me, and it was brand new. I'd never even opened a Bible before. So this was my very first time even opening a Bible. And we read it, and our first time going to church was Mother's Day of 2011. That was our very first time ever going to church together. And then in August, I started really questioning my thoughts about everything, and I thought, I think that I want to get baptized. I don't know everything yet, but I know that's where it is. My mom is not a Christian, neither is my dad, neither is my brother, neither is actually nobody else in my family. I'm the only one. When I was talking with Mike, I said, what happens when I become a Christian? Do I go to heaven and then my family does not, and it's just me with my now husband, but not with my mom or my dad? And one thing about my mom is she is my best friend. She is the person I talk to on the phone every day about everything, right? And knowing that I was basically turning away from the one person that's been in my life since I was born, that was really hard. I've asked her, when I was talking with her, when I was still studying with Mike before I decided to become baptized, he went out of town, and my mom came because she was with me over the weekend. And I remember talking to her about different things, and I said, there was one verse in the Bible that really got me, Matthew 7:23, about, hey, what about me? I've talked about you. And he says, I don't know you. And I remember talking to my mom about this, and her and I having this conversation. She's like, well, what about me? Would I be able to go to heaven? Because my parents are divorced. And I said, well, there's always hope. That's what's in the Bible. And right then I was like, if I'm believing what this Bible says, and I am trying to persuade my mother into believing it too, maybe not persuade's the best word, but trying just to make her believe it too, because now I'm believing it. Right there, it just made me think, okay, maybe this was where I'm needing to start going. Because prior to that, being in the military, my life there was cussing all the time, drinking all the time. I mean, you just have a different lifestyle when you're not part of the way that you're supposed to be, that the word tells us to be. But I was not even going down a path that was even close, because I didn't know. And maybe there was a part of me that says I know, but everybody else was doing it too. So I thought, why not? Is this something that's where I was? And so doing all that and then thinking what the Bible said in these verses made me think, this is where I need to start going. And so probably it was 2 weeks later that I really decided, hey, and I told Mike, I said, I want to get baptized that Sunday morning. And he goes, well, when do you want to do it? And I thought, well, when am I supposed to do it? When you ask people to come forward, that's when I'm supposed to come forward. And so he was like, all right, let's go today. So it was pretty intense, because at that point I knew that I was leaving my family unless they decide to change their ways too and decide to come on this journey themselves. But I knew at that point, when I go to heaven, that they might not be there with me. It's very sad, and there's been fights, and there's been crying, and there's been a lot of things that has happened because of it, but I just had to know and stand my ground after I'd made that decision with my family.
I didn't get up and go up front and say, I want to be restored. I tell you, I sat there and cried and prayed in the pew and asked God to take me back, and that I was home. And I felt a peace about that. And I think sometimes, our transformations take different forms. And, my past is still a part of me. It's not something it's completely let go. I carry certain mementos and documents and certain things with me, and I think back, and, I still struggle with, I remember Mike telling me about, you're not any worse than Paul, and let's talk about what Paul did. And then I start to think about these things I've done in my youth and in my early 20s and stuff, and I think, wow, you don't carry a stick. I don't carry a stick to Paul, and his transformation, though we have this accounting of it being very vivid. I'm just an ordinary guy, and my transformation is my transformation, and I still to this day can think back to that moment where gave myself back to God, and that gives me a certain peace.
I knew how I grew up. And my nights on Friday and Saturday nights were a lot different than most people's that I have that go to church with me and our friends. And so that one was really hard for me, just to think that I'm really good friends with this person if they only knew. And so sometimes I have that hard thought process, so then sometimes I just keep it to myself, because I'm afraid, what if they do know everything that I did before I was a Christian? And I think that's where sometimes we feel like we don't know, because I remember coming to church first couple times and they'd say, well, you know this story. No, I don't know this story. I have no idea what you're talking about. So for a while there, I was like going through trying to make sure I knew every story, because I'm like, I don't know that story. I have no idea. Like I knew Noah, but that's about it. I didn't really know any details or anything like that. So that was really hard. That was a hard thought process to think of.
This is before, I've held on to this verse. It's underlined in my Bible. I read this verse often. It's in Isaiah chapter 55. It's 7, 8, and 9. And it says, for my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts higher than your thoughts. And I hold on to that, because that's surrender. That here is our God, and I want to think that I know best. I want to think that I am in control. I want to think that I can fix it. I want to think that I can find my own way. And what I get from this verse is, you've got to surrender. You've got to let His thoughts be your thoughts. His ways are higher than your ways. So there's an element to, okay, I've got to look for the answers in the Word. I've got to be okay with what it says. I've got to surrender. I've got to focus where He wants me to focus. And anytime that I find myself misdirected, I have to back up. I've got to, and that transformation for me is what that is right there, is that surrender.